All right, good morning and welcome to Counterpoints. This will be the last Counterpoints on a Wednesday before the election.
Yeah, I was going to say, exactly a week from right now, as we are speaking, the election results...
We'll be asleep, hopefully.
Yeah, well, I doubt it. The election results will be in. It doesn't mean we will know who the president is, because that wasn't the case last time. There were really tight margins, and it's looking very similar, if not even closer, than it was in 2020.
And happy Steve Bannon released from prison today.
Wow, that's a big deal.
I listened to his podcast this morning. He's a free man. I have so many questions about his time in prison. Did he wear two prison outfits? The way he wears two... For people who don't know, he wears two of the button-down shirts.
And for the record, Bannon going to prison because he didn't respond to a subpoena.
Right.
There are other cases against Bannon, but the one he went to prison for is refusing to reply to a congressional subpoena over January 6th.
And lots of people don't do that.
No, tons of people don't.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's as funny as the two jumpsuits is, I guess. The law firm, maybe not so much, but
we're going to talk about the Kamala Harris's rally, which both Emily and I were at last night in Washington D.C. We're going to talk about Garbage Gate. Did Joe Biden say that all of Donald Trump's supporters are an island or a pile of garbage, or did he just misspeak? We will parse that for you.
We'll get to the bottom of it.
Could swing the election, so we need to get to the bottom of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Then we'll be talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. not getting off the ballot in some swing states officially decided by the Supreme Court yesterday. So huge news, really, even though it could only affect a few thousand ballots. It's still really big news. We had
Emily's friend Ryan Gerdusky booted off the CNN. It was great how it started, how it's going. I'll be on CNN at 8 p.m. I have been banned from CNN. We'll also be talking to Amir Tabon.
Well, to be fair, Gerdusky and I aren't exactly friends, but Ryan is alluding to a debate that we hosted with Zero Hedge on immigration. That was a Robbie Suave versus Ryan Gerdusky and Jack Posobiec and the Libertarian presidential candidate. It was a melee.
I didn't think I could be shocked. Those MAGA dudes talking about what they were going to do if they win the White House.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Then we're going to have Amir Tabon, who is an Israeli journalist and author of the new book, The Gates of Gaza. He has not just an incredible story from October 7th. He and his family lived in Nahal Oz, which is the kibbutz that is closest to Gaza. You may have actually heard something about his story about a year ago. Absolutely gripping. We're going to talk to him just about his book and also the unfolding genocide that's going on in Gaza now, including some updates from northern Gaza, as well as my interaction yesterday with Matt Miller in the State Department press room. And then we've got Emily interviewed Eric Schmidt, Missouri senator.
And more importantly, friends with J.D. Vance, probably J.D. Vance's closest friend in the Senate. So had him on Undercurrents and asked him a little bit about whether Elon Musk undercuts the drain the swamp message, and if he's worried, actually, as Matt Stoller is, about Trump telling this wonderful story and how the Google CEO keeps calling him to tell him the McDonald's thing was the biggest. Who knows whether or not that's actually true, but it was a good conversation about the realignment and some insight into the campaign as we get closer to Election Day. So speaking of which, Ryan, should we start with the A block here?
Yeah.
And the rally we were both at last night on the National Mall. The Ellipse is that park.
Put this VO up here while Emily's going.
Right, you're going to want to see this,
A1.
and if you're listening, we'll describe it a little bit, but the Ellipse is the park that's directly south of the White House, and Kamala Harris hosted a very well-staged rally that ended up drawing a massive, massive audience. The sun was setting on a quite literally perfect fall day in
gorgeous.
Washington. Amazing weather. And it stretched all the way back to the Washington Monument. It's got sparser towards the Washington Monument, which is still an impressive feat because that's just a lot of ground to cover, and to have it that tightly packed. Ryan, what did you make of the rally last night?
And they had a handful of kind of regular people who would tell stories about a kid who needs insulin and gets it cheaper because of Biden's and Congress under Biden cracking down on and making insulin cheaper and that sort of thing. But in general, nobody else. Like, there was no Joe Biden, there were no senators, there were no members of Congress, there were no labor leaders. So it wasn't that sense of rally. It was just like, oh, here's the vice president, and that's it. The one takeaway we were talking about before the show started, she did her thing where she talked about how Trump got in the way of Democrats wanting to crack down on the border and this really tough immigration bill that they had, negotiated with Republican immigration hawks, and the crowd is just like dead silent. They're like, we don't want to hear this. And then she says, and of course, we are a nation of immigrants.
Right.
And the crowd erupts at that. So it was interesting to see that while the Democratic elites have done a complete 180 when it comes to immigration policy and the approach to immigrants on the border, that at least this kind of demographic of the Democratic base was like, no, we actually meant it when we said like all are welcome here. Like we're not actually with you on this pivot that you've done.
So Kamala Harris, the parts of the speech, she was billing this as a kind of democracy speech, billing it as her closing argument, and started off making a very direct parallel to January 6th. She said, right here where we're standing right now, Donald Trump, encouraged his supporters to go down to the Capitol. And then she pivoted to the meat of the speech being way more about, like you were saying, healthcare costs, childcare costs, inflation, home prices, and all of that, and brought it back to these questions of democracy and everything at the end. Literally as she was speaking, and we'll get to this, but as she was speaking, Joe Biden was on CNN like 100 yards behind her, making his like weird garbage comment about Trump supporters. We will parse that, don't fear. But that was happening at the same time as Kamala Harris had this line where she said, I have it right here, the fact that someone disagrees with us doesn't make them the enemy within. So talk about stepping on the messaging.
That was a theme of the speech. She said she's not gonna put her opponents in prison. She's going to give them a seat at the table.
Right.
Otherwise, standard Kamala stuff.
She's coming in with a to-do list, not
a to-do list, not an enemies list. Here's a little bit of Kamala from last night.
We know who Donald Trump is. He is the person who stood at this very spot nearly 4 years ago and sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol to overturn the will of the people in a free and fair election. Our democracy doesn't require us to agree on everything. In fact, we like good arguments from time to time. Just think of your own family, right? It's not the American way to not have disagreements. We don't shy away from robust debate. In fact, we like a good debate, don't we? We like a good debate. And the fact that someone disagrees with us does not make them the enemy within. That's right. They are family, neighbors, classmates, co-workers. They are fellow Americans. And as Americans, we rise and fall together.
So I think it's worth being very clear, Ryan. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. Kamala Harris being able to draw a massive crowd in Washington, D.C. on a nice day is really not a sign that, it's sort of, we do the same thing with Trump rally sizes too. It's not a sign that she's necessarily going to win, that she just was able to draw a bunch of people from the Beltway whose livelihoods are connected to the federal bureaucracy that Donald Trump is threatening quite explicitly. Lots of defense people, defense industry people out here. So it's not hugely impressive as a feat, but I thought they put it together very well.
Sure. Well, except I guess you weren't inside the gates then. At the end, they only had like one place to leave.
Oh, really? That's
like they were afraid we were going to go sack the Capitol or something. It took longer to get out than it was to get in. Like,
they knew what you were up to. They knew what you were up to.
Am I under arrest? If I'm not under arrest, you need to let me go.
Right. There was a pretty rowdy cohort of Palestinian activists who were outside the gates of the rally, and I caught on video a couple of times. I mean, it got tense because people were waiting in a really long line to get into the rally, and the Palestinian protesters did strategically a great job of setting up camp right in the high traffic areas. And so as people are waiting, they're shouting shame and are you okay with genocide, which is really riling up the Kamala bros, as you can imagine, who start saying like, you're pro-Trump, and it was this interesting split screen of sort of people in their like Dockers and Barber jackets yelling at the Palestinian activists who had pictures of babies that had been, injured, killed in the war, and they're being yelled at by, in some cases, these just like pasty white, I can say that because I'm pasty white, but these like pasty white rich kids who just need them to vote for Kamala Harris. So it got, they did a really good job of, you could actually hear them all the way back at the Washington Monument. Like strategically, I heard that you could even hear them inside the rally from the press pen. So they were
maybe not
loud throughout the entire rally. You could hear them. They had bullhorns and were genuinely, I think they genuinely did what they sought to do, but it was another great split screen, because when I stood in the same spot as I stood on January 6th, I was watching and I was trying to compare what I was seeing. The most well-off crowd I've ever seen at a rally, ever. And that doesn't mean there weren't people who flew in private jets on January 6th. Of course there were. But it was a much more sort of hard scrabble crowd. And it was similar with
last night. It's people who live in D.C. or suburban Maryland or suburban Virginia.
Yeah, I just thought it was a similar dynamic, actually, though, with the Palestinian activists. And you've probably seen this before. It was like scrappy people who weren't, making these big paychecks and getting shouted down by people who, felt entitled to have everyone vote for Kamala Harris.
I didn't see it. Where I was, I didn't see any friction between the protesters and the. I mean, I saw some people saying like, "We agree with you."
I saw that too.
And I think they understood, like they're not going to win an argument at that point anyway.
Yeah.
And they probably actually do agree that what they disagree with is they're like, well, yeah, we're just gonna swallow this and vote for this person anyway.
Totally. And then they're showing up at a rally.
Yeah, exactly. And so Trump was in the Lehigh Valley last night. My dad and my brother went to that rally, actually.
Just to check it out.
Just to check it out. But Kamala has a new ad kind of targeting Trump people, which is making the rounds here. Let's roll that.
Your turn, honey.
In the one place in America where women still have a right to choose, you can vote any way you want. And no one will ever know.
Did you make the right choice?
Sure did, honey.
Remember, what happens in the booth stays in the booth. Vote Harris Walz. Vote Common Good is responsible for the contents of this ad.
What'd you think of that?
I think it's almost insulting to women. I see what they're doing. I think it's insulting to, it's also like a huge L on mail-in balloting, because that's a huge problem with mail-in balloting is you potentially have someone like watching over your shoulder or filling out the ballots for you and saying, oh, I know how you're voting. Oh, ballot's filled out. Put it in the mail. Don't worry about it. But on top of it, it's just like, I think a woman can like tell her husband she's not voting for Trump. Yeah, I know that does get tense in people's marriages. I understand that, but like, you don't need Julia Roberts to tell you it's okay to go against your husband.
Yeah, I wonder who that ad is for.
Suburban women, right?
Who are already voting for Harris and making them feel even better about it. Like, maybe a comparison would be the way that Obama has been saying, if you're Muslim, how can you vote for the guy who did the Muslim ban? Like, I don't think that's actually aimed at Muslim voters. It's aimed at other people who might feel like, because of their solidarity with the Arab or Muslim American community, that they might not be able to vote for Kamala Harris, even though they themselves are like, well, I prefer Kamala over Trump, and it's regrettable what's going on in Gaza, but it's not really my main issue. But then if they feel a sense of solidarity with their friends in the Muslim or Arab community, then they might side with them. And I think what Obama was doing with that one line, saying, if you're Muslim, how can you vote for the Muslim ban guy? It gives the non-Muslims then this like permission structure to say, yeah, you're right, that is crazy. I'm going to be an ally by voting against the Muslim ban guy. So maybe this makes some suburban women feel better. Maybe it works. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. Anything, I mean, at this point, any tiny little demo you can pick off when you have a statistical dead heat, essentially, is, if that works on a couple thousand women, it may be the difference. So even though that seems unlikely, I guess they're throwing everything at the wall, getting Julia Roberts out there. Now, speaking of which, we don't have to just go by crowd size or advertisement messaging. Let's take a listen here to Harry Enton, who gave a pretty interesting breakdown of where the polls are right now on CNN yesterday.
That's all we hear about. Oh, Donald Trump's going to outperform his polls. So I went back and checked out whether or not a party outran the polls 3 presidential election cycles in a row in the key battleground states. It's never happened. It's never happened. 0 times since 1972. So if the polls are going to underestimate Donald Trump once again, that would be historically unprecedented. Now, maybe you want to make the argument that Donald Trump himself is historically unprecedented, but what normally happens is the pollsters catch on. Hey, we're underestimating. We're not taking into account some part of the electorate. They make adjustments. And I think that helps to explain why we have never seen that the same party has been underestimated 3 times in a row in presidential elections, at least over the last 52 years. And what do we see in 2022 in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin? Well, it turns out that the average poll in those states actually underestimated Democrats by 4 points. It underestimated Democrats by 4 points. And I want to apply that to the electoral map, because if it turns out that the polls underestimate Donald Trump, or underestimated the Democrats, like they did in 2022, what happens? Well, Kamala Harris wins a sweep because she wins all these Great Lake battleground states. She wins down in the Southeast, and she wins down in the Southwest, and she gets the 319 electoral votes.
Okay, so that's actually some pretty interesting historical context there, Ryan. Another thing I wanted to add is my colleague at the Federalist, former colleague John Daniel Davidson, wrote a piece really interesting in terms of polling. It's not a piece about polling, but it's called "The Social Stigma of Being a Trump Supporter is Gone," which I think is probably true on a national level. Maybe it's not true in everyone's marriage, but that actually, if we're trying to figure out whether this polling is accurate, a lot of that inaccuracy in the polling was attributed to the, quote, shy Trump voter phenomenon. So when even you have the Federalists saying they feel like the social stigma of being a Trump supporter is gone, I do wonder if we look back a week from now and see that affected the polling.
Yeah, the Federalists would know, right? So
That's
and
true.
I think it's true. Like, people are, for better or worse, if they like Trump, they're more willing to say it now than they certainly were, I think, in, say, October of 2016.
Totally.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.